Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today I'll talk about my Penance brand of Dissipation Slayer Charge Stacker. Now, Penance brand of Dissipation is probably just pound for pound the strongest new transfigured gem in the game. It has been played by almost everybody at this point, and I wanted to give my own spin on it. However, I didn't really want to make a Valdos farmer. I didn't really feel like it did fit into the MF niche, although you can do it. You can one-shot bosses, right? The world is your oyster. Use it while it's not nerfed. But what I wanted to do with it is get a ton of movement speed while still having decent defenses and a ton of damage. And that's basically because I was kind of tired of the whole Abyss stuff, right? Magic fighting, everybody's kind of doing it. I wanted to try something else. And there is a ton of stuff you can do out there like Heist, Sanctum, boss rushing, etc. But yeah, with the new charms having the 2% movement speed per frenzy charge on them being able to stack, you having a that which was taken, which even gives you more movement speed, being able to use Replica Restless Ward even better on Slayer, being able to have 12 of each charges with the combo of Badge of the Brotherhood plus Masterful Form just kind of felt like a pretty easy shoe-in. Currently, this build is sitting at around about 500-ish% movement speed, give or take, depending on your gear. It's probably going to be more like 400 to... You can min-max it way more, but at some point I just said this is enough. When it comes to movement speed, it really depends on what you're comfortable with. But this build kind of did get me back from my burnout, from the whole juicing stuff, into more of a grounded approach and just being fast again. I just absolutely love the feeling, and this build kind of fits the bill. But let's get into the build portion of the video. First, let's knock out what the build is actually made for. And the answer is everything that leverage movement speed and that isn't already covered by Magic Find. I had some interesting ideas for this league, especially when it comes to mapping, but honestly, they have intricate items and they can't use the same 8 quantity items. And I don't want to sabotage anybody, right? Just play MF, make your monies, and like, yeah, do whatever. But this build has different things that it does well. Everything that needs movement speed, everything that actually needs you to be fast and where quantity doesn't work. So for example, Heist, Sanctum, Invitation Rotas, meaning feared, formed, etc. Those are all basically child's play. When it comes to boss rush, I mean, there's a lot of flavors out there right now, but especially right now, which is pretty hot as of this recording, is harvest rushing, for example, which gets paired with essences or smuggler's caches, also hunting beasts and stuff like that. The good thing about this build is that the movement speed is actually unconditional, or at least I think I have like 50, the Slayer movement speed on kill, right? That isn't up right now, but everything else is up. And that is basically because your movement speed is unconditional and you have Ralakesh, right? That's such a big thing about these boots. They work everywhere. They work in your hideout. You're always fast. It's honestly just a pleasure to play. I can't really say much more. What is not good for Abysses, I mean, honestly, just throw on the same items everybody does this league, make your monies, and we're all going to pretend like that's build making, right? It's fine. And then Ubers. Honestly, this build can do Ubers. Of course it can with this amount of damage, right? Where we are currently, this is at least the damage that I have. Defense isn't like great for an end game build. You have 75% spell block, but if something gets through, you can die. But usually you should one-shot most things. However, I can't really recommend it because there are Penance brand versions out there that do over 1 billion damage, and they don't need to scale movement speed or really anything else, right? So they can just focus on that. So if that is what you want to do, I would probably focus your character. But if you just have to do like an Uber for a challenge completion or something, that is going to be no problem. And then let's go over Penance brand of Dissipation, one of the new transfigured gems. I would say this is probably the most busted new skill when it just comes to raw power. The clear is really meh, honestly, especially compared to a lot of the other alternatives. So everything that has to do with clearing maps or something like that, it's forte, let's put it that way. But it has ridiculous damage. If this skill doesn't get nerfed, we know nothing will get nerfed. Basically, that's the kind of deal. So this skill has Fizz to Lightning conversion. It starts as Fizz. It has a certain cast time. Don't get diverted by the cast time on top. This is just to put down your brand, but the activation range is further down below. It says activates every 0.6 seconds while attached. So while it's attached to an enemy, it frequently pulses. This does scale with cast speed. You actually want a lot of cast speed. And basically, the more energy you have on your enemy, the more damage and radius your next hit will do. Now, there used to be a bug with Runebinder, which has since then been fixed, which was pretty funny because the skill was already considered OP, but it didn't work really with Runebinder. So what happened, as far as I know, is there's a maximum of 20 energy. And if you had 2 brands attached to an enemy, what would happen is each would only proc for 10, which would, I think, mean that they dealt the same amount of damage, but now the AoE would suck, because it would be AoE from 2 10s instead of from 120, which is way bigger AoE. They fixed that, and it now works, and the skill is even better now, which makes me even more likely that it's going to get nerfed next league. Either way, if you are Poison Penance brand, that's kind of a problem because now you can't really get here. But if you are any other version, Runebinder is a no-brainer. Also, you need 50% conversion. When it comes to what kind of conversion, obviously you get both on your gloves. But when it comes to what conversion, you have Herald of Ash, but no Wrath. So technically, fire gives you a little bit more damage. But if you convert to lightning, it gives you a little bit more shock potential. But if you convert to cold, it gives you a little bit better freezes. So it's really up to you what you want. It doesn't really matter. You can't use Trinity on brand skills. So that's just gonna come down to preference. Now, then let's quickly talk about tri-ele stacking right here. I made a list of everything you get from tri-ele stacking. But we first have to talk about how this actually works. So the way it works is you stack maximum power charges. If you have Badge of the Brotherhood, that also scales your maximum frenzy charges. And if you also have Masterful Form, those maximum frenzy charges that get scaled off of the maximum power charges now also scale your maximum endurance charges. And then you use Ralakesh to have your maximum amount of charges. That's all it is. Don't freak out about anything here. These power charges are basically just because of Malachi's loop. Completely ignore them. All you have to know is you always have all your charges, even though they don't show up on top. You don't need to generate them, but you also can't consume them, right? That is basically the gist of it. These boots are completely broken. Like I said, if you want to play this build, I think it's going to have to be this league because both Penance brand and Ralakesh are probably on the chopping block. Now, since everything scales off of your maximum power charge, right? It means that you can have actual minus maximum endurance and frenzy charges and it won't do anything. Because whatever your maximum power charge is set to, which for me is 12, is also going to be your max frenzy, max endurance. So something like Replica Restless Ward, the downside is no downside at all. -2 maximum endurance and -2 maximum frenzy charges. Doesn't give you anything minus. And that means that you can get a ton of movement speed from this chest, as well as that you get a ton of regen. Now, you can just leverage that normally. For example, if I run something like Heist, I won't even activate my RF at all. However, you can because you basically have RF for free, right? So, where is it? RF, it doesn't do anything. You have like 1,500 regen, and after RF, you still have like 600 left. So that is basically that gives you basically 40% more spell damage. You can also just leave it on. In this build, we're using Zealot's Oath, so we can basically just regen off of our energy shield, and then the life is solved with the Overleech from Brutal Fervor. Now, the maximum power charges are pretty damn easy. You have the +3 from your passive tree. Obviously, you start with 3. So with the passive tree, you will be at 6. One of them, the one over here, we anoint. We have +1 from Void Battery right here. We have +2 from Malachi's Loop, which does not have any downside on this build because of Ralakesh. We have +1 Corruption from Will Clash. And then we have +2 from our rings. You just need 1, and then you get a Calandra's Touch on, and it is mirrored. And now you have 12 charges. Now, to make this a little bit easier to digest, I actually put everything that I could think of that these charges give you. Obviously, you have the intrinsic charge bonuses, which is just more damage, attack speed, crit, fizz damage reduction from endurance charges, and then all LE res. You also have extra bonuses, and these are basically all items and passives. Also, don't forget about just how strong charms are for these charge stackers this league. We have stuff like evasion rating per frenzy, movement speed per frenzy, ×2. And then I'm also using this AoE per endurance and a little bit of cannot be stunned, but you can definitely have a third one of these if you want to be even faster. Now, everything else I listed here, you will find on the items, like I said. So, for example, Void Battery, spell damage per power charge. Malachi's Loop, spell damage per power charge. Will Clash, LE damage per power charge. And then also block spell damage per power charge, which is very, very strong. You get a total of 60% spell block, which basically makes it possible for us to path left side instead of right side, and we don't have to pick up the spell suppression. If there's specialized content where you do way too much damage anyways, you can also go both, theoretically, and go spell block and spell suppression, but I didn't feel like it was necessary for what I was farming. The chest is also completely ridiculous, so these are kind of like shoe-ins, and you can beat Void Battery's damage with Mirror Tier 1s. You can probably get like, I think, what was it, 15 to 20% more damage from a Mirror Tier 1, but you will also lose the +1 to power charge because you cannot replicate that, which also means you're going to lose some regen, you're going to lose spell block, you're going to lose movement speed. So overall, just make sure it's actually worth it for you for that little bit more damage that you probably won't even need. All right, next up, Spectres. I put the sound up a little bit so you can actually hear this. But one of these guys is super annoying. If you're playing on sounds all the time, maybe reconsider your life choices. That's all I'm going to say. But these are ridiculously powerful. I'll show you how to summon them in a second. Now, I'm no expert on Spectres, right? I'm just a user, right? This is just a user experience. But basically what you're getting is from one of them, you get Zealotry, and from one of them, you get Grace. Usually I would use Grace. I want my defenses to be always up, right? And I would use like the haste one. But the problem is I actually need, and I mean need, I need to use the haste on myself for Sublime Vision. It gives me 10% increased action speed, which is really strong. So haste on myself, and then Grace and Zealotry from my 2 Spectres. So that is what these Spectres give me. They give me the more spell damage, the evasion rating. This is all from Zealotry and from the Grace. And then you also have 30% crit multi, which also comes with one of the Spectres. And then on top of that, now you can choose more Watcher's Eye mods. Usually a big downside with Sublime Vision and only being cornered into using one aura is that you can't really get a good Watcher's Eye, and that's also true for this right here. However, now we have more to choose from. We get 15% increased movement speed from the Grace Watcher's Eye. So this is the Watcher's Eye that I currently have. Let's see where it is. Yeah, this one right here. Phasing while affected by haste. Absolutely great for all the content you want to do. That is always up. And then while those Spectres are nearby, which is going to be most of the time, you're also going to have 15% movement speed and the pen. The movement speed, I would also say, is GG, obviously. The pen, I mean, there's definitely better stuff, but that is what I got. Now, you can see that we are using Convocation on left click, and that is basically so they always are nearby. So you can see up here the Zealotry and the Grace aura. If we're just full in motion, they're not always up. They're not up 100% of the time. I would say they're like up 60 to 70% of the time, as you can see right here. But it really depends on the content that you run. Big deal about Convocation is also that little bit of regen actually makes a huge difference, and your Spectres are going to die if you don't have it on left click, at least in my personal experience and for the content that I was running. So yeah, in total, Spectres are a complete no-brainer. The setup that I have for them is Ray Spectre. You want a level 21, and then you want Meat Shield 2020, you want Elemental Army, and you want Minion Life. This way, they're not going to die as much. They're not going to be aggressive. They're not going to get out of line. Stuff like that. Now, important to know, what you should never do is unequip your Ray Spectre, because then they're going to die. However, they're going to lie on the ground. So quickly, just so I can show you this, Perfect Pain Artist and Perfect Primal Thunderbird is the ones you're looking for. There's also a PoEDB page for them, so you can check out what they give and stuff like that. So yeah, usually they should be lying around. However, if they die, and you have to resummon them. I'm just going to quickly show you how this looks like if you would have to resummon them. You have to buy these. Right now, this one is 10 chaos. This one is 40 chaos. One thing I will tell you is this guy is squishy as hell. So if you don't have the right setup, he's just going to die over and over. If you're doing Ubers for some reason, which you shouldn't on this build, it's not really made for it, but you can do it, right? It will die. This guy can take a lot of heat. So if you're doing harder content, I think the Wrath one is actually a lot more tanky, but once again, I'm no expert here. So you right click it, and then it's going to be on the ground. Right click it, it's going to be on the ground. And now all you have to do is Q, and it's going to raise them, right? That is literally all you have to do. Once you have that done, hide the Ray Spectre so you don't misclick something, like accidentally click on a corpse in the map or something like that. There's also a way to get another Spectre, which I think would be at the next level if you had like an Awakened Empowered level 5, which costs like a mirror right now. So you could have triple Spectres and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just a user. This was more than fine for me. I don't want to finick around with this. It kind of sucks as is, but it's easy enough to set up. Now, when it comes to Ascendancy, there's a ton of different versions out there. It can be confusing what you want to play. But stuff like if you want to be super tanky, you go Trickster. There is Inquisitor versions that are very all-rounder focused, or they're farming Valdo's maps. As far as I know, most of the boss killers are assassins just for ZHP, right? You go in, pop the boss, portal out. This build is basically made around endurance charges as well. So usually you just go for badge, you stack power charges plus frenzy charges, or you don't stack any charges at all. Completely depends on the version. But on this version, you have all 3 charges, and that gives you quite a bit of upside. The first one is you figure out physical damage reduction just per default. You have 48% physical damage reduction just from having those endurance charges. The 48 all-res also helps a ton with gearing because you have a lot of uniques. It's not a big deal because you could solve it with one of your suffixes, but if you look at what the suffixes on these flasks are, if you had to replace one of them, it would be kind of rough to choose. Now, endurance charges also opens up Replica Restless Ward. The movement speed you would get on other versions as well if you really want to, but this also gives you regen, so you can use your energy shield a lot more efficient with Zealot's Oath, and you also get free Righteous Fire. And that is all thanks for the Masterful Form. We already talked about it in the charge stacker section, but it's basically what lets you have all 3 charges. Then we have Brutal Fervor, which is an absolute favorite of mine. It just gives you Overleech. It's incredible, especially with Zealot's Oath, because now your regen doesn't count for your life anymore, but you still have that Overleech to compensate for it. And you have Bane of Legends and Headsman, which are just very efficient damage nodes. Now, another thing that the endurance charges give you, besides what we already talked about, right, is a lot of access to increased area of effect. So on charms, there is 6% increased AoE per endurance charge. So that comes out to 72% increased AoE, which is no joke. That is a ton. And on power charge, that mod is only 4%. So also another nice side effect. Or on that which was taken, which I'm not really sure where it is right now. I think it might be up here. Yeah. You can also get stuff like 5% Chaos Res per endurance charge, which we have right here, and that together with a Progenesis, or potentially also on another charm, just caps your Chaos Res right away, which is very annoying. Chaos Res is probably the most annoying when it comes to these unique heavy builds. And you can even have increased AoE per endurance charge and Chaos Res. The only reason I didn't do that is because I didn't need that Chaos Res, and the cannot be stunned while leeching is very nice. So talking about charms, this is going to be your second choice. We're just going to go for charms, right? It's going to be Primalist. You have this little inventory right here. And after that, you get charms. What I opted for is movement speed per frenzy, evasion rating per frenzy. The evasion rating per frenzy is not that important, but you do get a ton of evasion. So on the current version, it does make quite a bit of difference. Yeah, we have around about 83% chance to evade, and you can also have the plus to evade on your Watcher's Eye if you get a better one than I have, theoretically. So the only exception I made to not get even more movement speed was this one right here. The stun immune is very nice, or Chaos Res if you don't have it on your that which was taken, and then the AoE per endurance charge. All right, next up, let's talk about items. I already talked about all the interactions of the power charge stacking items and the uniques. I'll just go into some corruptions and some more specifics right here. Void Battery. Make sure that your cast speed is as high as possible. The crit chances are you're already overcapped, so it's not going to matter that much. That is the only roll that really matters. It goes from 10 to 20, and then Pen is the GG corruption. Then after that, we have Ralakesh Impatience. You will see a little bit of theme here. Once again, we're going for movement speed. 10% movement speed corruption, which is max. I have 11% movement speed corruption on my badge. It only goes to 10, but we did actually use the corrupted catalysts to get another +1, which is not worth your money or your time, just a fun side project that we did. So we have 11. And then also Mage Blood with 12% increased movement speed during effect. We also have 2% per frenzy charge on our dad, which was taken. We have the charms and stuff like that. And you might think these don't matter, but altogether, they are going to be the difference between you having 300% movement speed and 500. So there is a huge difference with all of that min-maxing going on. As for Ralakesh, otherwise, none of the rolls really matter. Maybe the Chaos Res or something, but yeah, whatever. Mage Blood, well, we're going to go to that in a second. Badge of the Brotherhood is basically what holds this all together. It makes it so our power charges also count for frenzies, and therefore, with the Slayer, also for endurance charges. The effect of Elusive and the cooldown of travel skills doesn't matter at all, so you don't have to get a perfect roll or anything like that, just so you know. On Malakai's Loop, the fizz damage from hits taken as cold damage. I think the GG is taken as fire damage because we have Barbarism. Theoretically, that's going to make almost no difference. Just saying, if you're using Taste of Hate, it would be cold. Now, Corruption for Replica Restless Ward. There are some for like a Mira Plus that have like +4 or +3 or whatever. But the corruptions you're looking for are +2 duration gems, +2 AoE gems, or just +1 in general. Those are the best corruptions that you can get, and it does make quite a bit of a difference. So I would definitely go for that. Otherwise, maybe you can get a second corruption alongside it, like reduce damage taken from crit or increased damage. And on Will Clash, you definitely want that +1 to maximum power charge. If you can't get that, you could even consider maybe going for a rare helmet with +1 to max power charge, either a synthesized one or I can't remember what the influence was. One of the influences also has +1 to maximum power charge. And then if you get the Leech, that is very nice. If you don't get the Leech, you're gonna have to get that on Doriani's Lesson on a Cluster Jewel. Do not forget it, because otherwise you're not going to Leech. Very, very important. Okay, so after that, we go into Ring. Your GG Ring. Now, this character is already so fast, you're not gonna feel the difference really, but I mean, this precursor is absolute GG. This is one of the reasons I even started the build, and it's kind of hard to replicate precursors, obviously. In terms of power level, the strongest one would be a +1 rare Power Charge Ring, which as of this recording costs a few hundred divines, up to a Mirror if you want a 3-stat one. You might even have to mirror it with a fee or whatever. That is even better. This one I picked up like 2 or 3 weeks ago for like 200 divines. So the most important thing is that you get something with +1 to maximum power charges. Everything after that is kind of a bonus. You can also get a Herald of Ash one, like the Circle of... I don't think it was Guild, it was one of the other ones. But either way, +1 to maximum power charge wherever you can get it. The nice thing right now is Kalandra's Charge is not too expensive because of all the MFing going on. So if you get one good ring, that's 2 good rings. And then we have the gloves, which you just want conversion. Any sort of conversion. I already talked about that at the start, but it depends on what you want. Either more shocks, more damage with Herald of Ash, or you want more freezes, chills, whatever. It just needs to be converted. You can't use Trinity. You don't have to think about anything like that. You want the increased damage per frenzy charge. And this is basically where you're going to get your int and your dex from. You might ask why you need int. You're in that int area anyways. Well, Void Battery needs 245 int, so that is kind of rough. So the easiest way to craft this is get Fracture Dexterity and then just slam on Deafening Spites, I think is the int. Yeah, Spite. And then, I don't know, just go for Life Evasion. In this case, I also went for Brand Attachment Range, which is a very strong stat to get as well. The way you make these gloves in particular is pretty easy. After you slam the Deafening Essence of Spite, you need to annul off the 3rd suffix, and then you need to... Suffixes cannot be changed, and then Veiled Chaos, and wait until you fill a suffix, and then you have to unveil the suffix into Brand Attachment Range. Pretty simple, and then you just make your prefixes. However, the Brand Attachment Range can just be whatever else you want. Maybe you're liking Chaos Res or anything like that. Kind of like your flex slot. As for Flasks, this is a Mage Blood build. GG Corruption would be movement speed during Flask effect, but I wouldn't really stress it. But you want 4 magic flasks, right? You can also go 3 and go get a Taste of Hate in here, but I honestly wouldn't be sure what you would cut. Maybe the Jade or the Diamond. I'm not really sure. I would definitely go for a 4. So it's going to be Jade Flask, Silver Flask, which does... The Onslaught does scale with Flask effect, which is why it's so strong. Diamond Flask, and obviously a Quicksilver Flask. As for the suffixes, we chose the reduced mana cost to basically fix your mana straight up. We go for the cast speed, extremely valuable with Penance Brand. We have the crit right here. We have Quicksilver Flask with movement speed, and we have a Progenesis at the end. Now, one thing I want to mention, if you're doing Heist or you're doing certain things, you can always swap in Ellie Flask. So for example, for Heist, we're using Ruby Flask so we can just walk over the traps without dying. So I would definitely recommend looking into that and making kind of like flex flasks that you can sub in for whatever you need. Next up, we have jewels. The first thing we have is an Adorn setup with 4 different magic jewels. If you don't know how to craft those, I actually made a video about it. The most important thing on your Adorn setup is that you are freeze immune. If you are not, so with this mod here, avoid being frozen, make sure that if you multiply that with the effect, you actually get to 100%. If you don't have that mod and it's just something like Crit Multi or whatever, you just go for Soul of the Brand King instead of Solo Solaris. That's what we're using on Pantheons. Another mod that's pretty damn great is actually the chance to avoid bleed. Same thing here. Make sure that you have 100% total. Bleed is a lot harder to get, so if you can't go for that, it would be annoying, but it's not like you're gonna die constantly. It doesn't happen that often. You have a lot of evasion, but it is nice to have. Crit Multi is huge. The best, the GG implicit, would be increased attack and cast speed during Onslaught, but as you can see here, my jewels are nowhere near perfect. Not even close. Some even have tier 2 rolls. Disgusting, right? So here I got lucky with the Corrupted Blood. You might have to buy Corrupted Blood, but without Corrupted Blood, it's gonna be really, really sketchy. Then we have a Militant Faith. The easiest place to put it is probably this one right here, although you can experiment around with it. So the Militant Faith is mostly there just for inner convictions. This gives us more damage per power charge, and the downside doesn't exist because of Ralakesh. You don't need to get any frenzy charges. They're just there. You count as having them. So there's no downside. This is straight up 36% more damage for Keystone. I have no idea why people are running Elegant Hubris setups. I guarantee you this is 100 times better. As for min-maxing, the stats here don't really matter that much because you don't have much devotion, but you can still min-max, right? You get a little bit of all-res, you get a little bit of reduced mana cost, maybe get a little bit of increased damage. You can also look at that. Just make sure it's a high Templar Dominus so you can get inner conviction. Balance of Terror, you can either use or not use. You can just go for another Adorn Jewel right here. However, this one is considerably more damage. You want the 40% of Fizz damage as a random element if you cast Ellie Weakness recently. Now, we're using Ellie Weakness anyways. What we're actually doing for Ellie Weakness is we're using Cursed Ground to make it a lot easier to apply. So with Cursed Ground, what happens is Basically, you can throw it down on the ground, and it's just going to be up. You can't really see it right here, but you can pre-throw it against bosses, which is super nice to have. And whenever you cast it the next 10 seconds, this is just a huge damage increase, a lot more than even an Adorned Jewel will give you. It also gives you 15 auras, so just all around a really strong jewel. The second mod, immune to exposure, really doesn't matter, but whatever. It's just nice for style points. And then you have Sublime Vision, which is super important. This is the reason we're only using haste. However, as you might have seen, we're still using heralds, and that's because heralds are not technically auras. So you can still use haste plus double herald. And on a Fizz build, you have Herald of Ash plus Herald of Purity, which is a very strong combo, especially when paired with Discord Artisan. These 3 points here are quite premium. They're like 4.1% more damage per point. And then at the end, round it out with a Watcher's Eye. I would definitely go for phasing while affected by haste. Movement speed, if you have the Spectre set up, movement speed while Grace. There's not really anything else on haste, so if you're not using the Spectres, that is just kind of a throwaway, but you definitely want the phasing. On that which was taken, for me, the most important part is obviously the movement speed per frenzy charge, but then you also have the base crit. Base crit is huge. Base crit while at maximum power charges, very strong. You can also get it on a charm, but then you can't get anything else. The problem with the power charge charms is, I can tell you right now, that these suffixes absolutely suck. They have certain prefixes and suffixes. You can't get +1 base crit and crit multi per power charge. It doesn't work, right? There's certain prefixes and suffixes, and the suffixes suck because we're not spell suppress based. If you're spell suppress based, it's obviously a lot different. Otherwise, chaos res per endurance charge. Just so you're not confused, the chance to gain an endurance charge when you stun an enemy does nothing. Now, as for gems, we have our main setup, which is going to be Penance, Brand of Dissipation, Awakened added fire damage. So there is a way you can just go lightning with it, but since we're using Herald of Ash anyways, and there isn't really any difference in damage type on this, it doesn't really matter. You can do Trinity, but you don't need Lightning Pen. You can do it, but Awakened added fire damage is just very, very strong, and there's no reason not to use it. But you can play around with that however you want. I have an Awakening power because I invested in it pretty early. I don't really like investing in mirrors all that much, so sometimes I just buy fancy items. The difference is negligible, so unless you have, like, I don't know how much in this build already invested, Awakening power is like the last thing you want to buy. Just normal and power level 4. Increased critical damage, it's okay. Power charge on crit is just 48% more damage, really strong. And then Inspiration kind of fixes your mana together with the Mage Blood Flask. Then we have our cost 1 damage taken, increased duration, Immortal Call setup, which doesn't do all that much, I'm going to be completely honest, simply because we don't generate any endurance charges and we're on Ralakesh. One thing you will note with this build is a lot of these are kind of like support gems. You take it or leave it. If you want to, you could probably unequip like 14 of them and you're not going to feel that much of a difference. You can just throw in Enlightens and level them, I guess. So what I'm trying to say is if you have any other ideas for these things, you can definitely go for it. Then we have Brand Recall, which here we have an Awakened Enhanced setup with Frostblink, Brand Recall, and Convocation. Frostblink, I mean, it's just travel distance, so the Enhanced doesn't do that much. It's just there to basically get over hurdles when you're blocked from something. Brand Recall, the quality gives you CDR, so it just makes it a lot nicer to use. Basically, we're right-clicking, or wherever you have your Brand Recall, makes it a lot easier because you don't have to recast the brands again. You can just cast it all over. But it also gives you brand attachment range, which is very strong. Convocation, the extra skill effect duration, and CDR is going to make it a lot easier to keep your Spectres nearby. As you saw, we're really fast, and still the Spectres kind of stay near us. Then we have our auras, which is Haste plus Herald of Ash, Herald of Purity. Obviously, you can go Val Haste, yes, if you want to. It makes it even faster. I just didn't want to press another button, I'm going to be honest. It's a build that's there to be comfortable, but you can play around with the buttons as much as you want. You will need an Enlighten 3, I think, at least. I didn't even need a 4, so no reason to buy anything fancier. Herald of Purity, Herald of Ash, just really nice damage. Once again, you can still use that with Sublime Vision because Herald of Purity and Herald of Ash are technically not auras. Then we have our Spectre setup. I already talked about that in detail in the start section. Raise Spectre, Meat Shield, Elemental Army, Minion Life. After that, we have Righteous Fire, which we're using because we're Slayer and we have so much regen from our chest. Once again, if you're doing stuff like Heist where you actually want the regen to run over traps, you could just not activate Righteous Fire. You don't need the damage. It's just there whenever you want to activate it. Same goes obviously for Baal Righteous Fire, which I almost never activate, but if you want another button, it is there. And then we have Elemental Weakness, which is there for our Balance of Terra, so we get the 40% Fizz as extra of a random element, but it is obviously also a really good aura. It's a ton of damage, and it is supported with one of the most underrated support gems in the game. A lot of people are using Arcanist brand with their curse, but they're not using this. So once again, Cursed Ground, it does actually scale with AoE. You can't see it here very well, but you can see it here. This huge radius right here is the curse. Everything that stands on it gets cursed. It doesn't have any less curse effect or something like that. Just straight up your curse, and this stays up for like 40 seconds. Talking about passive tree, it's pretty straightforward. In terms of jewel placement, the only thing you have to consider is where you put your Militant Faith. Here you can have an easy Inner Conviction without screwing anything up. One of the reasons I didn't put it up here is it because it would block int, and we're actually quite int-starved because we need 245 for the Void Battery. Unfortunately, we even need to get it on gloves. So if I put it up here, all of the int node gets converted to devotion, whereas the strength here doesn't really bother us too much. We have two large cluster setups. Both of them have the same. It's just Iron Breaker, Force Multiplier, Master Fundamentals. So Master Fundamentals is in the back, and we get the two good ones in the front. Unfortunately, I know there's one with Fizz damage and then increased evasion and armor. That would be GG, but there's no way to get that in the front with Force Multiplier, and we don't want to spend the extra 2 points because the tree is quite spread out and tight. I'll say this one more time here. If you do not have Leech on your helmet or your Amulet Corruption, you will need a Leech cluster with Doriani's Lesson, just so you know, because Slayer only gives innate Leech to attack builds. It does not give it to spell builds, so you will need that, just so you know. And you can't get it on a passive tree. So yeah. As for mediums, so it's 3 times the exact same jewel, but otherwise you have to get Doriani's Lesson with an elemental one. The two different mediums we're using are one with Vast Power plus Towering Threat. Vast Power is huge. Towering Threat is very solid. Just a good medium cluster. And then we're using 2 of these. And they're basically just so we get to 100% crit. I actually don't remember if we're at like 98, 99. Since the Penance brand needs to ramp up, you really want to get as close to 100% as possible. Especially if you're doing the content I talked about, like Sanctum. You don't just randomly want to not one-shot that one mob or want to get unlucky on the boss or something. It's not going to matter in the end if you're geared like this. But I'm just saying it is something to think about. Also, we get even more movement speed. I think you can see kind of a theme at this point. Otherwise, the only life notes we really take are the super important ones, the super efficient ones. We're not even taking Juggernaut because we're not scaling any armor. Is there anything else? Obviously, the 2 power charges. The Herald nodes are actually worth it. They're incredibly, incredibly efficient damage-wise. If you don't like the shock that you sometimes get from the Malachai's Loop, which is an 18% shock, then you can also go for shock immune here if you really think like that's going to make a difference. I guess important here is definitely take the brand attachment range, especially if you don't have it on your gloves as well. You will love that. Zealot's Oath is obviously there, so you can sustain your RF and your energy shield doesn't go down all the time. Just very nice to have, and you have the Overleech anyways. I guess we're capping Spell Block. That's something we're doing. And then also we are using this one, which I'm actually not sure if this mastery is still that great because we are using Elemental Weakness. But Elemental Weakness is not always up, and whenever it's not up against normal mobs, that chance is just like, I don't know, it's like 20 to 30% more damage. As for leveling, the absolute no-brainer thing is the Twink leveling guide from Tai over on Maxroll for Duelist, which uses deck stacking, 1 with nothing. I'll link it down in the description. Everything you need is going to be in here. And if you want to do something new, you can also check out what I did with Kinetic Bolt of Fragmentation, which just basically one-shots everything. I don't have a complete guide here because it depends on what Ascendancy you are. And whenever I made this guide, I was actually a Deadeye. But that's how I personally leveled the build. All I did was follow what I did in the video. I will also link that down in the description. And then I just went around and took all the attack speed nodes, took movement speed, took like a little bit of life, crit, right? I just went around and went from there. But if you want a completely structured from start to finish leveling guide, then definitely check out the Maxroll one. But yeah, that's about it for the video. This build was an absolute banger. If I came out with a build, I knew it would have to be something that does different things than MF, because I had a lot of ideas, like I said, for mappers and stuff like that, but I didn't want to put on the same 8 quant items on every build. There's no like room for innovation there. There's nothing interesting to do. And at the same time, I'm not going to tell you guys not to go MF. It's just very strong. Just use it if you want currency, right? So this build actually has a unique selling proposition, which I like. But yeah, whatever you want. If you're kind of tired of that, or if you just want to try out something new, if you want to be fast and speedy, this build is going to be for you. Penance brand of Dissipation is probably not going to be there without giving you foam or anything like that. These boots might get nerfed to tier 0 or they're going to get nerfed pretty much. This whole setup has been a ton of fun. But yeah, that's about all I got. And since I still never slogan, see you next time.